Hello and welcome along to this episode of The Startup Accountant. Today we are joined by Brian Kearns, our Head of COSEC in Cronin Company. Brian, welcome along.
Thanks for having me, John. Pleasure to be here.
Very welcome, yeah. So Brian, what we might do is I know we've covered different things in the past, like RBOs and company setups and all that, but when you're up and running, you need to file your annual return every year. And even the date of that with the ARD date is awful funny. So do you want to give us a run through of what exactly is this annual return and what needs to be in it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably good timing for this conversation as well, John. And we've got, I think about 50% of all companies in Ireland are going to file their annual return in Q4, right? And that's what happens every year because generally your annual return date is 9 months after your financial year end. And then a lot of companies have a December 31st year end. I would say, first of all, it's worth knowing your annual return date, right? Because it's not like, say, the corporation tax return date, where if you've got a December year end, then your corporation tax filing is due in September of the following year. The Company's Registration Office allocate companies their annual return dates based on when they're first incorporated. So if your company was incorporated in May 2024, your first annual return would have been due in November 2024. Now that first one goes in without financial statements. Your next annual return date will automatically become November 2025. But if you have a December 24 year end, your annual return can't be made up to a date that's any later than the 30th of September, right? So you've got a maximum period of 9 months between your annual return date and your financial year end. So basically, if you have a November ARD with December year end, you're going to need to bring that date forward, and you're going to then need to file your annual return within 56 days of the earlier date.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's worth talking to your accountants, checking the CRO website, seeing does your annual return date match up with your financial year end, and if not, making sure that you file at the right time, right?
Absolutely. Get the calendar out in a big red mark at it, because it's so easy to miss those dates. Because with CT, at least, and I'm talking in general here for the December year ends, because that's the majority of companies. We'll get on to the other year ends in a minute now, but at least it's right at the end of September, 21st September, whatever it is. But then the ARD date can be completely different. You could have there's one we had a couple of weeks ago, and they had the accounts for June and April, and it was a December year end, and it was crazy stuff. But it's just it's so complicated, and it's so easy to miss as well that it's crazy, because then you miss it and there's late fees and penalties and everything.
Yeah, I think the consequences now of missing your annual return date are more significant than ever. I mean, right, so you've got the immediate late filing penalties, right? We'll talk about the changes to the audit exemption rules, but depending on what size of your company are, potentially you lose your audit exemption. Company's Registration Office have recommenced enforcement proceedings. So they've recommenced involuntary strike-off proceedings against companies that have failed to file their annual return date. They can commence those just after one missed return, right? But also these are kind of always seen as kind of longer-term penalties. But now it's impacting things like everyday banking, access to credit, things like that. If you go to try and open a bank account or get a loan or, do any sort of transaction with your bank, they're now going to the Company's Registration Office and making sure that, your last annual return, your last accounts are filed and that the company is up to date and compliant. Okay. So the other thing that a lot of startups miss, in my experience, is that first annual return date, that 6 month one.
That's a sneaky one.
It is a sneaky one because you don't have to file accounts with it. And generally you're barely up and running, right? You've got your company incorporated, your tax registration is done, your RBO, you finally got your bank account open, starting to trade, maybe some money coming in if you're lucky, probably not. Yeah. And next thing you have a statutory filing requirement with the Company's Registration Office. And if you miss that, you're automatically into late filing penalties and things like that. So it's not a great start, right? In terms of what goes into the annual return, it's essentially a snapshot of the company information at a point in time, which is the annual return date, right? So on your first page of your annual return, you'll see things like the annual return date, the financial year end, company name, company number, registered office address.
Yeah.
Moving through the pages, then you get the information of your current officers. So your directors, the statutory information that you need to file for them, addresses, dates of birth, nationalities, things like that. Who's the company secretary? Next page tends to be share capital. So what you'll see on that page is the amount of your authorised and issued share capital. And that'll be like the gross number, right? It's not necessarily split by share classes or anything like that. You'll see your current shareholders, and you should also see any movement in shares between the last annual return or the date of incorporation, if it's your first annual return, and the current date. So it kind of, when you transfer shares in a company, you don't necessarily notify the company's registration office. But when you file your next annual return, those changes in shareholdings during the year are tracked within the return. And that's generally it in terms of the information that goes in.
There is like a huge amount in it, like, and I think one thing that we see is like it's too easy to run it off, but like the client actually needs to sit down and look at it and think, right, well, hang on, is this still the shareholding? Because like you can't leave this sort of stuff to the last minute, because if there is a director that's still sitting on there or a shareholder, you need to get them off. Like, and there's paperwork that needs to be done and everything. This isn't just you press backspace a couple of times on Microsoft Word, you file it. Like,
yeah, exactly.
You need to back it up. Like,
and again, just to go back to kind of, who relies on this information. So like your customers, your suppliers, all these people check your annual return and your financial statements. Because companies have this protection of limited liability, people want to know that the company is solvent, that the directors are who they say they are, that the owners of the company are who they say they are, right? So that they can deal with them with some kind of confidence, right? So there's a lot that goes into it. Again, if we talk about banking, if the bank goes and looks at, let's say it has an application form to open a bank account or an application for credit, and it looks and it sees, right, the directors are listed here, they don't match the company's registration office. That's an immediate red flag, right? You're not getting that loan, you're not getting that bank account until that issue is resolved.
Yeah.
Similarly with shareholding. So shareholdings, it's the same issue, but also now you have the added layer of the register of beneficial ownership behind that, right? So every time you go to deal with your bank, again, for an account opening or an application for credit, they will check that what you filed on the private register of beneficial ownership matches what you filed publicly with the company's registration office and what's on your application form with them. And again, if there's a mismatch, they're actually prohibited from dealing with you under the anti-money laundering legislation. So they have to actually flag the fact that there's a discrepancy to the anti-money laundering compliance unit or the register of beneficial owners. They send that notification on to you. You don't know who has reported or what the difference is, but you have to fix that before the bank will start dealing with you again. So it is, it is important that the information that's there is up to date and accurate.
And that's massive with the bank. And that's another thing we've come across a lot, because it's so easy. Like someone that might have moved around the last couple of years, or they're renting, like, and they're putting down addresses or their parents' addresses. And it's like, it's just which address you're picking. Exactly. In theory, like, they're probably all correct, but just for whatever unique circumstances arise, it's a bit haphazard, and then they get themselves into like hot water there. That like,
yeah, exactly. And I mean, like, I think these days, look, if you try to open an account for anything, you used to say if you go down to the video shop, but there's not too many of them around anymore. But like you have to kind of provide proof of who you are and where you live. Like, it's your passport and your utility bill. Well, for companies, it's the extra layer of, right, well, does the public record match what we're being told? And unfortunately, if it doesn't, then people just are refusing to deal with you until those records are rectified.
Absolutely. And like, one of the main reasons there is, like, say, if you're a new supplier or a new customer going to start dealing with someone, you need to know, as you said, like, that they are like up and running, or they're doing it around what they're doing. And if it's not up to date, like, why are they going to give you credit, or why are they going to go with you for like a long-term project and pay the deposit or whatever it is? Because
exactly, and we've seen a lot of that. Like, I think a couple of years ago, the CRO brought in director's identity verification. So when you file your annual return now, or you appoint a director, you have to put in the director's PPS number. If they don't have a PPS number, they have to apply for an identified person's number. And so if you put in a PPS number, and that doesn't match identically with the individual's records with the Department of Social Protection, that return that annual return, or B10, appointing the director, gets rejected immediately. Now, we had 60 years of, Thomas being allowed to go down as a director as Tom, Tommy, T, whatever it might have been, David even, and no verification. And then all of a sudden, it was kind of overnight, these records have to match identically. And what we found was that there are discrepancies within the Department of Social Protection records as well. Like, we've had clients with 2 dates of birth and things like that. And
2 birthdays, not bad.
Yeah, exactly. And we had to work through all those issues. But in the meantime, people were ringing us saying, we've been declined for credit because our annual return is outstanding, and the bank can't access it and things like that. So look, it is very significant. Those companies could have been relying on credit to pay employees, pay suppliers, keep the lights on.
Absolutely. It could be a quiet month, you need an overdraft, or there's a big project kicking off and like the wheels come off it, and then that's putting you under massive pressure to try and get your hands on that money personally or through family or friends. And it's just so small little bumps, especially nowadays with the cost of everything going up overnight. Clearly, it's like you have to be on top of this sort of stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
I think like the first annual return is always a kind of a bit of a sneaky one, because like people, they set up companies and then it may not be until 2 or 3 months later they actually get the bank account fully up and running and the card machine or whatever, the website, and then they're up and running. And then sometimes maybe a shareholder or director leaves, but they never update the annual return. They just roll it over and file it. And it's like, there's been situations where like people don't look at these things and someone has like a percent of their business and they haven't done anything since come up with the brainstorming idea at the start, maybe doing half on the company corporation or something. But it's exactly, you have to know what you're dealing with. Like,
so like, you set up your company, you get through your first year of trading, you're doing your own bookkeeping, your financial records are up to date. Get to your year end and you go, right, I'm going to go get myself an accountant to put together the financial statements, get them filed with the company's registration office. And, already you've missed your first 6-month return. You could be €1,200 in terms of late penalties deep. And, that's certainly a cost that startups could do without, but it's not a cost that anybody wants to pay at all,
No, absolutely. And it's like €3 a day or something like, which is
it's €100 for the first day automatically and €3 a day thereafter. And there's no appeals process with the company's registration office. You have to pay that when you file. You can do a district court application, and the district court kind of hears those applications on good faith, right? But it could mean 3, 4, 5, 6 months where you're non-compliant, and then you're also relying on the relief actually being granted on the late filing penalties. So it's not an ideal situation for anybody to be in. I guess, look, the other consequences that we touched on briefly of missing your annual return date, right? So you have the late filing penalties, which are, unfortunate and straight off. There is the possibility of the company's registration office commencing involuntary strike-off proceedings against you. Now, generally, there used to be a rule that it was about 400 days after a missed annual return. So you had a year and a bit before they would start doing it. It was kind of an unwritten rule. It was that sort of time frame. But they paused these involuntary strike-offs during the pandemic. And a couple of false starts with kind of getting them re-going again. There were some technical issues that they experienced, but they've all been resolved now. So, they are actively starting this process of enforcement against companies which are late in filing their annual returns. So, look, if you have a late return and you haven't really heard anything about it for a while, you're probably going to be getting a letter in the door in the near future. And look, it used to be the case that where people would say to me, like, so what, right? I have a late return. What's going to happen to me? And a lot of the time you'd be telling people, look, unless there's an insolvency situation or you owe money to the revenue, probably nothing. But I don't think that's the case anymore. Like, I think we have a much more active director of corporate enforcement now. We have director identity verification, so it's easier for them to match, say, John Richardson with that company, that company, that company, that company. It's the same individual. And they've been talking for years about this kind of a points totaling thing for directors. So if you're a director of multiple companies which are late in filing their annual returns, or if you have a history of non-compliance, well then, if there is a significant issue, they will treat you more harshly, perhaps, than people who had an otherwise, good record in terms of.
Like, and even just you look at the revenue, like I know the revenue and CRO are separate bodies, but it's the government at the end, and it's the same thinking cap. But they have it on the ads in the radio that, like, if you're late filing, increases your chances of getting an inspection and late filing fees, etc., because that's all that they see, and you have to put your best foot forward.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. And they are definitely becoming more joined up, right? There was a couple of high-profile cases last year where when they hit the news, it was, an individual has been arrested and charged with filing false information on their annual returns with the company's registration officer for knowingly providing false information to an electronic filing agent. And, they were out on bail but had to hand in their passport and travel documents and things like that. And that was a massive, I was kind of going, wow, how did we get to where we were to this? But it transpired that they were looking at other things. Just like you say, there was some issues with revenue, there was some issues with CRO, there was other things going on in the background. So it was probably an easier first kind of tick to say, we know the information on the annual, or we suspect the information on the annual return is incorrect. So that's where we're going to put the mark in the sand, and that's where we're going to start off in terms of what we're, how we're going to prosecute this investigation.
So, Brian, historically, the CRO have had like a no-nonsense approach to being late. You're late, that's it. Audit 2 years and late fees. There's been a change recently.
Yep, absolutely. A welcome change for small companies. So, as you said, prior to the 16th of July this year, if you filed your annual return late, it was an automatic audit for the next 2 years. They've changed the rules for small standalone companies, so it doesn't apply to companies that are part of a group. But if you're a small standalone company, you're now allowed to be late once in 5 years without losing your audit exemption. Right. And it's an interesting way that they've applied this new rule. So anything anything that was filed before the 16th of July this year is caught under the old rules. So if you filed your 2024 annual return on the 15th of July 2025, you're late and you're getting an audit for the next 2 years. If you filed that same return late on the 17th of July, well, then you're in the new rules. So you're not losing your audit exemption in that case. You will only lose your audit exemption if you file late again within the next 5 years. Wow. So it gives a bit of relief for smaller companies in Ireland. They're companies that have turnover up to 15 million, balance sheet total up to 7.5 million, and employees of under 50. So you have to kind of be under two of those criteria for the current year and the preceding year in order to qualify as small. But, that's a lot of companies.
Oh, absolutely. Especially the ones with that kind of money, you need a lot of them, because even for that, like the burden of having to pay for 2 audits can be very expensive. You're talking 6-7 grand plus VAT each year, which is massive, certainly more than the penalties. So that's a welcome change. That's brilliant.
It's very welcome, and it's proportionate in that it applies to small companies, and I think it's a good change that government brought in.
Very good. And then just finally, I know you probably get this asked every single day of the week, but do the CRO accept DocuSign on documents?
No, the CRO don't accept any kind of digital signatures on documents. So if you receive a company's registration office form, you have to print it off, sign it with your pen, date it with your pen, and then you can scan it in and upload the PDF copy of the signature page. But nothing like DocuSign, Adobe Sign, anything like that. No.
And if they do make a change, we'll be the first to let you know, because Brian's life will be so much easier.
It'll be so much easier, yeah, exactly.
Okay, Brian, listen, that's great. Thanks very much for jumping on. It was super. There's a lot there for people to take on, and thanks very much.
Great, thanks for having me, John.
See you all next time.